The smell of burnt diesel still lingered in the air when Sergeant Raymond Kowalski opened his eyes and realized he was alone among the bodies. Normandy, July 1944. A secondary road covered in mud and blood. 12 men walked into that ambush. He was the only one who got out. The German boots still echoed in the surrounding forest. Hoarse voices, short orders, the metallic clang of weapons being reloaded. Ray breathed slowly, each movement a blade of pain piercing his ribs. His left leg throbbed. Hot blood trickled down his uniform. He crawled, 10 meters, 20. The vegetation swallowed her groans. And then he saw an abandoned supply depot, half destroyed by mortar fire, its dark wooden walls rotting under the fine rain. The door was ajar. He entered like a wounded animal searching for its burrow. Inside, the air smelled of mold, rancid oil and rusty metal, stacked crates, empty barrels, torn sacks of spilled flour on the floor. Ray leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for a second. Just a second. That's when he heard the engines. He crawled to the crack in the window and looked out. Trucks. 12 heavy German military trucks covered in dark green tarpaulins advanced slowly along the muddy road. The column stopped directly in front of the depot. Ray felt his heart pounding in his throat. The Germans descended. Officers shouted orders. Soldiers ran to the sides, rifles in hand, checking the perimeter. A lieutenant pointed to the depot. "Here, get some gas." Ray didn't speak fluent German, but he understood enough. They were coming to get fuel. He had less than a minute before he was discovered. Out of ammunition. No way out. No chance. And then, as despair rose like bile in his mouth, Ray saw something that no military manual would ever teach. He saw 3 open barrels in the corner of the warehouse. Rancid bacon fat, solidified into yellowish clumps. Gallons of old, rusty gasoline reeking of sulfur. Rags soaked in motor oil. Ray Kowalski was not a career soldier. He was a cook, and cooks know what happens when you mix fat, fuel, and heat. The German boots banged against the wooden stairs. Ray stood up. Pain shot through his leg, but he ignored it. He grabbed a metal bucket. He poured in the grease. He added the gasoline. He tore the rags with his teeth. He mixed everything together with trembling hands. The door opened. A German soldier entered, rifle raised. Their eyes met. Ray threw the bucket on the ground and rolled behind a pile of boxes. The German yelled. More boots running. But Ray was already at the back window, holding 2 makeshift gallons of the nauseating mixture, his heart pounding in his chest. He had 3 minutes, maybe less, and 12 German fuel tanks waiting outside. Ray jumped out the window and disappeared into the shadows of the trucks. No one would ever believe what he was about to do. Not even himself. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, sign up now. Ray moved like a shadow beneath the trucks. The Germans were everywhere, boots stomping, voices barking orders. The rain had picked up, drumming against the canvas tarps, masking the sound of his breath. Ragged, desperate, each inhale a knife in his ribs. He pressed himself against the cold metal underbelly of the first truck. His hands were still slick with the greasy mixture. It smelled like death and gasoline. Like the back kitchen of his father's restaurant in Detroit, where they used to dump the old fryer oil into buckets and let it congeal into yellow-white sludge. Ray had hated that smell his entire life. Now it was going to save him. He unscrewed the fuel cap. Slowly, the metal groaned. He froze. A German soldier walked past, not 3 feet away, rifle slung over his shoulder, muttering something about the rain. Ray held his breath until the man disappeared around the corner. Then he poured. The mixture slid into the tank with a wet, obscene sound. Thick. Viscous. It didn't mix with the diesel. It floated on top, a layer of coagulated fat and oxidized gasoline that would sink into the fuel lines the moment the engine turned over. Ray had learned this the hard way in Detroit. A rookie line cook once dumped bacon grease down the kitchen drain. It solidified in the pipes. Took 3 days and a blowtorch to clear it. These trucks wouldn't even make it 3 miles. He moved to the second truck, then the third. His legs screamed with every step. Blood soaked through his boot. He bit down on his tongue to keep from crying out. Somewhere behind him, voices rose, shouts. The Germans had found the depot, found the empty barrels, found the soldier who'd walked in on Ray. Wo ist er? Suchen. They were searching. Ray moved faster. 4th truck. 5th. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped the 2nd gallon. The mixture sloshed, spilled onto his fingers, burned like acid. He didn't stop. 6th truck. 7th. The rain was his only ally now, covering his tracks, washing away the smell. But it also made everything slippery. His boot caught on a rock. He stumbled. The gallon slipped. It hit the ground with a metallic clang. Silence. Then, da drüben. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Ray dove beneath the 8th truck, crawling on his elbows, dragging the remaining mixture behind him. The beam swept over the spot where he'd been standing 2 seconds ago. Boots ran past. Close, too close. Ray's heart hammered so loud he was sure they could hear it, but they kept running. Toward the depot. Away from him. He exhaled, forced himself to move. 8th truck, 9th, 10th. His vision blurred. The pain was no longer sharp. It was a dull, throbbing darkness eating at the edges of his consciousness. He'd lost too much blood. He knew that. But he also knew that if he stopped now, if he passed out here beneath these trucks, he would die. And those 12 trucks would roll out at dawn. And the men they were carrying, ammunition, reinforcements, supplies for a counterattack, would hit the American lines before anyone even knew they were coming. Ray had heard the German officers talking. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood the maps they were looking at, the coordinates, the timing. This convoy wasn't just passing through, it was the tip of a spear aimed directly at the heart of the Allied advance. 11th truck. His hands were numb now. The mixture was almost gone. He scraped the last of it into the fuel tank, his fingers trembling, his breath coming in short, desperate gasps. One more. Just one more. He crawled to the 12th truck, the last one. The command vehicle. Bigger. Heavier. The officer's transport. Ray unscrewed the cap, poured the last of the mixture inside, screwed it back on. It was done. He collapsed against the wheel, his body finally giving out. The rain poured down on him, cold, relentless. He could hear the Germans still searching, their voices growing more frantic, more angry. But they hadn't found him. Not yet. Ray closed his eyes, just for a moment, just to catch his breath. And then he heard it. A voice. Calm. German. Very close. Interessant. Ray opened his eyes. A German officer stood 3 feet away, pistol drawn, pointed directly at Ray's head. He was older, 40 maybe. His uniform was clean. His eyes were cold. He looked at Ray, then at the fuel cap, then back at Ray. He smiled. Du bist ein toter Mann. You are a dead man. Ray didn't move, couldn't move. His body had nothing left. The officer raised the pistol, aimed it at Ray's forehead. And then, from somewhere in the forest came the sound of engines. American engines. The officer's smile vanished. He turned his head, barked an order. Soldiers scrambled. The convoy's engines roared to life. All 12 of them, coughing, sputtering, struggling to turn over in the rain. The officer looked back at Ray one last time. His eyes narrowed. Then he ran. Ray heard him shouting. Heard the Germans piling into the trucks. Heard the grinding of gears. The desperate acceleration as the convoy tried to escape before the Americans arrived. Ray dragged himself into the shadows, into the trees, into the mud. And he waited. 3 minutes later, the first truck's engine seized. The grinding sound was like bones breaking. It rolled to a stop, smoke pouring from the hood. Then the second. Then the third. One by one, the convoy died. The Germans abandoned the trucks and fled into the forest on foot, dragging whatever supplies they could carry, leaving behind 12 smoking, useless hulks of metal. Ray watched from the darkness, blood dripping from his mouth, vision fading, and as the American patrol finally crested the ridge, He allowed himself to collapse. But even as unconsciousness took him, one thought burned in his mind. The officer who had found him, the one with the cold eyes. He had seen what Ray did. He knew. And somewhere out there, in the chaos of war, that man was still alive, still watching, still waiting. Ray woke up 3 days later in a field hospital that smelled like disinfectant and dying men. His first thought was that he'd failed. His second thought was that the officer with the cold eyes was standing at the foot of his bed. But when he opened his eyes fully, it wasn't the German. It was an American lieutenant, young, maybe 25, clean uniform, clipboard in hand. He looked at Ray the way you look at a problem you don't want to deal with. "Sergeant Kowalski, you're awake." Ray tried to speak. His throat was sandpaper. A nurse appeared, held water to his lips. He drank, coughed, tried again. "The trucks, did they? 12 vehicles, total mechanical failure. All of them." The lieutenant's voice was flat, disinterested. "German convoy abandoned them. We recovered the position. No resistance." Ray felt something break loose in his chest. Relief. Overwhelming. Dizzying. "I stopped them. I put the mixture in the—" "You were found unconscious near the depot." The lieutenant cut him off. His eyes were hard. "Sole survivor of an ambush. Severe blood loss. Shrapnel wounds. You're lucky to be alive, Sergeant." "No, listen. I sabotaged the Germans ran out of fuel. Bad logistics. Happens all the time." The lieutenant made a note on his clipboard. The depot was empty. Nothing there but trash and old supplies. You hid. You survived. That's all that matters. Ray stared at him. His heart began to pound. Wrong. This was all wrong. "I used bacon grease, gasoline. I poured it into their tanks. Sergeant." The lieutenant's voice went cold. "You suffered a severe head trauma. Confusion. Memory gaps. It's normal. The doctors say you'll recover, but right now you need rest, not stories." Stories. The word landed like a slap. Ray tried to sit up. Pain exploded through his ribs. The nurse pushed him back down, firm, professional. Her eyes said, "Don't fight this." "There was an officer," Ray said, desperation bleeding into his voice. "German. He saw me. He knows what I did. There were no German officers recovered from that site." The lieutenant snapped his clipboard shut. "No prisoners. No bodies. They scattered into the forest. Standard retreat. End of story." He turned to leave. "This isn't about the trucks, is it?" Ray's voice was hoarse, bitter. "You don't want it to be sabotage. You want it to be their failure." The lieutenant stopped. Didn't turn around. "War is about morale, Sergeant. Ours. Theirs. A story about enemy incompetence boosts morale. A story about a half-dead cook crawling under trucks with bacon grease." He paused. "That's not a story anyone wants to hear. Or believe." He walked out. Ray lay there staring at the canvas ceiling of the tent. Around him, men moaned, cried, begged for morphine. The sounds of war's leftovers. He closed his eyes, tried to make sense of it. They didn't believe him. Worse, they didn't want to believe him. 2 weeks later, Ray was back on his feet. Barely. They gave him a cane and light duty. Kitchen work, peeling potatoes, stirring stew, right back where he started. Nobody talked about the convoy. Nobody asked him questions. It was like it never happened, but Ray couldn't let it go. Every night he lay in his bunk and replayed it. The trucks, the mixture, the grinding engines, the officer's cold smile. "Du bist ein toter man. You are a dead man." Ray started asking around, quietly, carefully. He talked to intelligence officers, logistics guys, anyone who might have records of that convoy, what it was carrying, where it was going. Most of them brushed him off. But one, a captain named Delaney Irish with a face like worn leather, pulled him aside one evening. "You really want to know about those trucks, Kowalski?" "Yeah." Delaney lit a cigarette, exhaled slowly. They were carrying ammunition, mortars, enough to support a 3-day assault on our forward positions. If that convoy had reached its destination, he shook his head. We would have lost a lot of men, maybe the whole salient. Ray's throat tightened. So it mattered. It mattered. Delaney took another drag. But officially? Mechanical failure. German supply chain breakdown. That's the story. That's what goes in the report. Why? Delaney looked at him for a long moment. Then he leaned in close. His voice dropped to a whisper. Because if we admit that one half-dead sergeant sabotaged an entire convoy with kitchen scraps, we have to admit how vulnerable we all are. How much of this war is chaos, luck, improvisation. He straightened up. And nobody wants to admit that. Not the brass, not the men, nobody. He walked away, leaving Ray standing there, the cigarette smoke hanging in the air like a ghost. 3 months later, the war moved on. Ray moved with it. He cooked. He survived. He didn't talk about the trucks anymore. But he started noticing things. Small things. Wrong things. Supplies that went missing. Reports that didn't match reality. Orders that came from nowhere and led to disasters. And once, just once, he saw a face in a crowd of prisoners being marched through camp. An older German officer. Clean uniform. Cold eyes. The man looked directly at Ray, smiled, and kept walking. Ray tried to follow, pushed through the crowd, but by the time he reached the prisoners, the man was gone. Vanished. Like smoke. Ray asked the guards, checked the manifests, searched the records. No officer matching that description had been processed. No one had seen him. It was impossible, unless it wasn't. The nightmares started after that. Ray would wake up drenched in sweat, gasping for air, the smell of bacon grease and diesel choking him. In the dreams, he was always back under the trucks, always pouring the mixture, always hearing the boots getting closer. But in the dreams, the officer was always there, watching, waiting. And in the dreams, the trucks never stopped. They kept rolling, kept moving. Toward something Ray couldn't see, couldn't stop. He started drinking. Not much, just enough to quiet the noise in his head. Just enough to sleep without dreaming. The other men noticed. They didn't say anything. Everyone had their ghosts. But Ray knew his was different. His ghost had a name, a face. And somewhere, in the chaos of a collapsing Reich, that ghost was still alive, still watching, still waiting. In December 1944, Ray's unit was rotated back to a rear echelon position for rest and refit, a small village in Belgium. Quiet, almost peaceful. Ray was assigned to the officers' mess. He cooked, he cleaned, he tried not to think. One evening, a courier arrived with a package, official, sealed, addressed to the commanding officer. Ray happened to be in the room when the CO opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Ray only glimpsed it for a second before the CO snatched it away, his face going white. But that second was enough. It was a photograph of 12 trucks, abandoned, smoke rising from their hoods. And standing in front of them, clear as day, was the German officer with the cold eyes. He was holding a sign. It read, Der Koch lebt noch. The cook still lives. The CO looked up, saw Ray staring. His expression hardened. Get out, Sergeant. Ray didn't move. I said get out. Ray left. But not before he saw the CO drop the photograph into the fireplace and watch it burn. That night, Ray couldn't sleep. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The officer knew. The officer was alive. And the officer was sending messages, but why? What did he want? Ray had stopped the convoy. He'd saved lives. He'd done his job. So why did it feel like the war wasn't over? Why did it feel like it was just beginning? And why, God, why, did he have the growing sickening certainty that what he'd done that day in July wasn't a victory at all? It was an invitation. Ray Kowalski died on April 30th, 1945. At least that's what the record said. Killed in action. Eastern France. Body never recovered. Purple Heart. Honorable discharge posthumously. Another name on another monument that nobody would ever visit. But Ray wasn't dead. He was in a basement in Berlin, and the officer with the cold eyes was sitting across from him. It had happened 3 weeks earlier. Ray's unit had been advancing through Germany. The Reich was collapsing, cities burning, soldiers surrendering by the thousands. Everyone knew it was over. Everyone except the men still fighting. Ray had been separated from his unit during an artillery barrage. Standard chaos. He'd taken cover in a bombed-out building, waited for the shelling to stop, and then a hand over his mouth, a knife at his throat, a voice in his ear. Ruhig, Cook. Ruhig. Quiet, Cook. Quiet. They drugged him. When he woke up, he was in a truck, moving. His hands were bound, his head throbbed, and sitting across from him, calm as death, was the officer. The same man who'd found him under the trucks 9 months ago. The same man who'd smiled and called him a dead man. "You're wondering why you're still alive," the officer said in perfect English. No accent, no hesitation. "You should be. By all rights, I should have shot you that night in Normandy." Ray said nothing. His mouth was too dry, his mind too slow. The officer leaned forward. His eyes, those cold gray eyes, studied Ray like a specimen under glass. "Do you know what you did, Sergeant Kowalski?" Ray's voice came out as a rasp. "I stopped your convoy." "No." The officer smiled. "You delayed it. 3 days, that's all. 3 days that cost us a critical offensive window. 3 days that allowed the Americans to reinforce their positions. 3 days that changed the trajectory of the entire Western Front." He paused. Let that sink in. 12 trucks, bacon grease and gasoline, 3 minutes of work, and you altered the outcome of a battle that would have killed 5,000 American soldiers. Ray stared at him. "Then why didn't you kill me?" The officer sat back. "Because I wanted to know who you were. What kind of man does that? What kind of soldier improvises a chemical sabotage with kitchen waste and no training?" He smiled again. Thin, sharp. "So I followed you, watched you. I sent men to observe, to report, to learn." Ray's blood went cold. "The photograph." "Yes, the photograph." The officer nodded. "I wanted your superiors to know. I wanted them to understand what you'd done. Do you know what they did with that information?" Ray said nothing. "They buried it, classified it, erased you from the official record. Because you, Sergeant, are an embarrassment. A reminder that wars are not won by grand strategies and brilliant generals. They are won by cooks who know how to ruin an engine." The truck stopped. They dragged Ray out. Downstairs, into a basement. The walls were concrete. The air smelled like mold and blood. They tied him to a chair. And then the officer sat down across from him. "I'm going to tell you something, Kowalski. Something no one else will ever tell you, and then I'm going to let you go." Ray's heart pounded. "Why?" "Because you deserve to know the truth, and because the truth will destroy you more thoroughly than any bullet." The officer opened a folder. Inside were documents, maps, photographs, all stamped with German military insignia. The convoy you sabotaged was carrying ammunition, yes, but not just any ammunition. It was carrying prototype incendiary shells. Experimental. Designed to burn through reinforced positions. They were scheduled to be deployed against a fortified American division holding a critical crossroads. He slid a photograph across the table. Ray looked down. It was a tactical map. Red circles marked German positions. Blue circles marked American positions. And in the center, a single crossroads. "Your division, Sergeant, the 29th Infantry, holding that crossroads. If the convoy had arrived on schedule, the incendiaries would have been deployed at dawn on July 18th. Your entire division would have been incinerated before noon." Ray felt the air leave his lungs. But the convoy didn't arrive. The attack was delayed. And by the time we regrouped, the Americans had reinforced the position. The attack was called off. The officer leaned forward. "You saved your own division, Kowalski. Every man in it, including your commanding officer, including the lieutenant who told you it was just mechanical failure. Ray's hands were shaking. They knew. Of course they knew. Intelligence recovered the German battle plans 2 days after your incident. They knew exactly what that convoy was carrying. They knew exactly what you'd prevented. The officer's smile widened. And they buried it. Because if they acknowledged what you did, they would have to acknowledge how close they came to losing. How fragile their victory was. How much they owed to a half-dead cook with bacon grease. He closed the folder. So they erased you. Made you a footnote. A nobody. Because heroes are supposed to be officers. Soldiers. Men with medals and speeches. Not you. Ray's vision blurred. Rage. Shame. Disbelief. All of it crashing over him at once. Why are you telling me this? The officer stood, walked to the door, paused. Because I want you to live with it. I want you to go home after this war and know that you saved thousands of lives. That you changed history. And I want you to watch as the world forgets you, as your own country pretends you never existed. As the men you saved look you in the eye and don't even recognize your name. He opened the door. That Kowalski is a fate worse than death. They released him 3 days later, dropped him in a field outside an American checkpoint. No explanation, no wounds, just gone. His unit had already declared him KIA. The paperwork was filed, the flag was folded. Someone back home had already received the telegram. It took Ray 2 weeks to convince anyone he was still alive. They reassigned him, gave him a new serial number, a new unit, told him to keep his mouth shut. The official story was that there had been a clerical error, a mix-up. It happened all the time in war. Ray didn't argue. He just cooked. And when the war ended in May, he went home. Detroit, 1945. Ray Kowalski, 27 years old, walked into his father's restaurant and put on an apron. Nobody asked him about the war. Nobody thanked him for his service. He cooked. He cleaned. He lived. But at night he dreamed of 12 trucks and cold gray eyes. He never told anyone. Not his father. Not his wife. Not his children. He carried it alone. For 50 years. Ray Kowalski was 77 years old when the letter arrived. It was from the Department of Defense, declassified documents, FOIA request. Someone, some historian, some researcher, had been digging through old war records and found something. A German intelligence report. Captured, translated, filed away, and forgotten. It detailed the sabotage of a supply convoy in Normandy, July 1944. It described the method, chemical contamination of fuel supplies. It identified the saboteur, an American sergeant, name unknown, believed to be a cook or mechanic, and it concluded with a single line. This action delayed Operation Wolfsjagd by 72 hours, resulting in the cancellation of the assault and the preservation of American defensive positions. Estimated enemy casualties prevented 4, 800, 5, 200. The letter included a photocopy of the report, and at the bottom, in neat German handwriting, someone had added a note. Der Koch hat gewonnen. The cook has won. Ray sat in his kitchen and read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully, put it in a drawer, and never looked at it again. He died 2 years later. Heart attack. Quiet. Painless. At his funeral, there were 14 people. Family, a few friends. The VFW sent a representative who didn't know Ray's name and read from a script. Nobody mentioned Normandy. Nobody mentioned the trucks. Nobody knew. But in the back of the church, a man stood alone. Older. Gray hair. Expensive suit. He didn't sign the guest book. Didn't speak to anyone. He just stood there. Watched. And when the service ended, he walked to the casket, placed a single photograph on top, and left. The photograph showed 12 abandoned trucks, smoke rising, a summer day in France. And on the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "Heroes are not always remembered, but history never forgets." The family never knew who left it. They threw it away with the flowers. 2003, National Archives, College Park, Maryland. A researcher named Sarah Chen pulled a box from deep storage. Routine work, cataloging old Wabiwatu records for digitization. Inside, she found a file marked Mechanical Failures, Enemy Logistics, July 1944. She almost skipped it. Boring stuff, supply chain issues, equipment breakdowns. But something caught her eye. A single page, handwritten note, clipped to a fuel analysis report. Sample recovered from abandoned German convoy Normandy, 7/15/44. Composition: diesel fuel contaminated with animal fat, pork rendering, estium 40% by volume, oxidized gasoline and textile fibers. Contamination appears intentional, method unknown, source unknown, recommend further investigation. Further investigation never happened, but someone, some clerk, some officer, some anonymous soul, had scrawled in the margin, Kowalski, check survivor reports. Sarah Chen ran the name. Found nothing. The survivor reports had been destroyed in a fire in 1952. Standard procedure. Making room for new files. She closed the box, moved on to the next one. The story of Sergeant Raymond Kowalski, the cook who disabled 12 German trucks with bacon grease and saved 5,000 American lives, was never officially recorded. It exists only in fragments, shadows, declassified reports that no one reads, memories that died with the men who carried them. But somewhere, in a basement in Berlin, in a filing cabinet that survived the war, there is a folder. And in that folder, there is a photograph of 12 trucks. And standing in front of them, barely visible in the smoke, is a man with a bucket. History doesn't always remember its heroes, but it never forgets the moment they changed everything. If this story marked you in some way, subscribe and stay with us. There are still many hidden truths the world needs to know, and we're just getting started.